Okay, here we go. How's everybody doing? Woo. Very good. You've made a great choice. No one washed away on their way here, which is a good thing. I'm glad you've persisted in a rainy night in Tucson and have come to spend time thinking about poetry with us. It's been a beautiful summer here in Tucson. It's been a good and rainy summer, but I'm really excited also for poetry to come back and poetry readings. So a round of applause for Dana Levin for bringing this back to us. Dana's been here for a week plus as our summer poet in residence, working on projects, and I know she'll talk a little bit more about that, but we're thrilled to have her back in Tucson and thrilled to have this reading happening here at the Poetry Center. I have some things I just want to let you know about because there's lots of good things coming up. My name is Tyler. I work as the director here at the Poetry Center. So things to tell you about. One is, how many of you know about the Seeley Challenge? Very good. How many of you are doing it? Mostly just me and my staff. You are. Good work. I'm really glad you are. It's not too late. So the Seeley Challenge, if you don't know it, is a challenge to read a book of poems every day for the month of August. 31 books, 31 days. And I just want to remind you that there are skinny books and big books. You can choose wisely. So if you jump in right now, and it's not too late, it's 23 books in 23 days. So it's an abbreviated version. I promise it will change your life. In the most profound of ways. So if you want to do it, you can join this hardy crew that is participating and feel a lot of grace and a permission to not necessarily have to do the full every book every day. So you can take a break. The only person who's in charge of it is you. But we hope you'll join us and maybe consider reading books with us in August. There's a great place that I happen to know about that's right across the breezeway, which has 60,000 or so books. And so I hope you'll come visit us and take advantage of our air conditioning and read books at the Poetry Center as well. We have a terrific library staff, some of whom are in the back, who can also make suggestions if you have suggestions you might be interested in getting some advice on what to read. And you can see a lot online from people who are participating. We have two events that are in support of that, and they're mostly celebratory, and they're both happy hours, and they're to celebrate milestones as we go. So on the 14th and on the 28th, where there's happy hours at the Tucson Hop Shop. You can bring your book and read with us, lift a glass if you're so inclined, and celebrate reading poetry together in the month of August. Why August? August is hard. I don't know why August, but we're doing it. Secondly, I want to tell you that our terrific current exhibit, The Place Where Clouds Are Formed, will be coming down at the end of this month. So if you haven't had a chance to spend time with that exhibit, this is the time to do it. It's a tremendous exhibit. It tells a story of borderland spaces and lives that is entirely different than the fodder that is part of the political talking points at this moment. So if you're interested in another side of that narrative, many of us know that who live here, this exhibit tells a really incredible version of that. And so I hope you'll come over and spend time with us while you're reading Seeley Challenge books and check out that exhibit before it comes down at the end of the month. Speaking of incredible things, we've just announced our fall season at the Poetry Center. It is so fresh that the announcement precedes our print calendar by a week or so. But you can find all of those details on our website and in our social media spaces or in our newsletter. And it's a really thrilling season of visiting poets who are coming, including, we launch on the 29th with that season as school starts back up with novelists from Mexico, Brenda Lozano, poets Mark Wunderlich, C.A. Conrad, and Mary Ruffel come in September. Poets Tilsa Atta and Farid Matuk and Pulitzer Prize winner Brandon Solm are here in October. Roger Reeves and Hala Alyan are here in November. And then we end with a reading from the U.S. Poet Laureate Ada Limon in December. So lots to happen there. And if you're interested in details, dates, locations, those are all easy to find on the website and will soon be in your mailboxes with our calendar. If you want to get the calendar and you're not on our mailing list, you can do so and sign up at the library. We're happy to get you on it. Or just come see me afterwards. I'll make sure you get the info. Many of those same poets are teaching classes, and so our scholarship financial aid process for classes is open right now. We want to make sure cost is not a barrier to participate, and so the Arnold Greenfield Financial Aid Program is open now. We have 4 spots to gift to classes that are happening, and they're entirely free. The application is very simple, and the award is by lottery after you apply. So we'll give away spots. After that, general registration will start. And each of the classes is first come, first served until they're full. General registration starts on the 13th. It's a Tuesday at 10 a.m. So if you're really excited about one of the classes, that is a really good day to be at your computer and ready to sign up, because some of them will go really quickly. And again, those are open until they're filled. Okay, that's a lot that's happening in the fall. We're very excited about it, excited to tell you more about it, and the materials will be coming to you in your mailboxes soon. I also want to note that books are for sale, so make sure that if you have any dollars in your pockets, that's what you're spending them on. And I'm sure Dana will be excited to sign them after the reading tonight. We'll skip a Q&A and just go straight to a signing line. So if you're interested in books, go buy those and come talk to Dana and wish her well as she ends her time in Tucson and heads back to all that comes next in St. Louis. To introduce Dana, we're very excited to have a great friend of the Poetry Center and a poet here in Tucson, Richard Sykin. Richard Sykin is the author of the books Crush, of which there will be a special 20th anniversary edition coming out in 2025. And I learned while Dana was here that Dana has written the foreword for that book, which we're really thrilled about. And Richard has a new afterword that will accompany the new edition, as well as the book The War of the Foxes, and the forthcoming collection, I Do Know Some Things, which will be coming from Copper Canyon Press in 2025. He's also the author of one of the most amazing Twitter/X feeds that I know, and it's a reason not to abandon that platform entirely. So please help me welcome Richard Sykin.
I think that's pretty good. Can you hear me? Can you hear me through the mic? Yeah? Great.
Try that, Richard.
Okay. All right. I had several weeks, maybe a month, maybe 2 months, to work on this introduction, and I pretty much worked on it every day for those months. And every day I came up with the same word, which was embodied. So I would write the word down and it'd be done for the day. Around yesterday, last night, I realized I had to have more than one word. There were a couple things I wanted to do. I wanted to bring something personal to the introduction. I also wanted to bring something smart to the introduction. The personal part, a lot of it has to do with the fact that I had a stroke a couple years ago, and I'm having trouble being embodied. And Dana's work has become even more important to me because of that. As for something smart, I couldn't do it because I had a stroke. I couldn't do it better than she has already done it. So what I want to do is share some of the things she said about having a body in interviews. Dana and I shared a mentor, Louise Glick, and she was diamond smart. Louise also struggled with her body, and she liked to live the life of the mind. And I prefer the life of the mind, though I'm okay with the body as a metaphor. And Louise and I could be very severe, unembodied, and at times compassionless. Dana did not take that path. In an interview with Wesley Sexton for the Adroit Journal, Dana says, "Art and religion were born the first time the living came in contact with the dead. The first time our primordial ancestor found her friend dead on the ground, touched him with her hand, and shook him, was the beginning of our central realization. The body and the animating spirit are not the same. For in death, the spirit vanishes, and yet the body remains. Our technological innovations have always been in the service to making work easier on our bodies, to accomplishing tasks with greater ease and greater speed. What would be easiest and speediest of all? To not have a body, to not be bound by time and space, to move and change all things simply by thinking it. Hence, hands-free communication tools, self-driving cars, increasing automation in all areas of manufacturing, and soon, everyday access to virtual reality, which I fear more than anything else because it will make it even easier and more attractive to ignore the karma of being an embodied spirit on Earth. She continues, most of the time, I think we're embodied because we are supposed to be. I don't think the goal is to leave our bodies behind, despite what many religions tell us. Humanity seems hell-bent on ridding itself of its pesky body, both the personal body and the earth. So there are other moments where I think, well, hey, we're tool-making animals. Maybe we're destined to become cyborgs. What do I know? And we may be taking such bad care of the earth that our cyberification may be our only hope for prolonging the species. Poetry has always been sparked by the body-spirit problem. It is the central thing it sings about, whether in love poetry, religious poetry, or poems of resistance. Even in surrealist work, in poetry that seems driven primarily to explore and express the imagination circus, the underlying tension is the way such poems sing against the imagination's annihilation. Inevitable because it is housed in a mortal body, C.F. Keats' urn. Technology and poetry sing out of the same mouth because it's the only mouth we've got. Please join me in welcoming Dana Levin.
I do not remember writing that. I'm like, wow. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Richard, for reminding me, and thank you for being here. And thank you, everybody, for being here. I really appreciate it. Tyler, thank you for being an amazing host. Paola, thank you for making sure I had chocolate. And everybody at the Poetry Center, it's been a very fruitful 8 days, and I have made headway on some things, so I'm very glad. Okay, so okay, I just want to tell you this because it'll give you context for what I'm going to do this evening. So I wrote this essay about studying with the poet Charles Simic when I was in my early 20s. And Tyler wrote me and said, I just want you to know, like, I thought this essay was great and I loved it. And I wrote back, I said, thank you so much for telling me that. It's actually part of a book that I'm working on. He goes, oh, I was so hoping you would say that. You know, do you want to come and be the summer resident? Because the Poetry Center would love to support this book. The book is about becoming a poet. And so I was here primarily working on prose, but it was prose about poetry. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to read 4 poems, and then I'm going to read an essay that takes 21 minutes. And you can tell me afterwards if this was a terrible mistake. But it's an essay about poetry. It's an essay about images. And it's not thinky, it's memoir. This is basically a memoir that I'm working on. So these are personal stories that sometimes get a little thinky because I can't help it. Thank you to the students who took my class Tuesday. I think we had fun. Yes. We talked about surprise. Okay, so the first poem I'm going to read is called For the Poets. And one of the things we talked about in my class are haibun, which is this hybrid form that comes from Japan, which in its classic form is a paragraph or two of travelogue. Today we went to Mount Fuji and we saw this and this happened and this happened. And then at the bottom would be a haiku that would be like a distillation of the journey. And I got very interested in haibuns where the journey part was interior. So this is a haibun, and it has all these allusions, quotes from Beowulf and the Iliad and the rock group The Who, Tommy, the opera Tommy. There's a reference to Ms. D, who is Dickinson, and Uncle Walt, Walt Whitman. And I'm telling you that because I'm a teacher and you must provide your citations. Okay. For the poets. To post, to share, to tag, to tweet, to have an audience for feats. Beowulf, granted the glory of winning, Grendel, driven under the fen banks, fatally hurt, and the whole panoply of insulted Greeks. Agamemnon, the most grasping man alive. But who, if I cried out, would hear me amongst the angelic orders, is the common condition. If only 3 people like a tweet, does anything you offer sound in the forest? The history of civilization is replete with selfies, from Pharaonic monoliths to portraits hanging in the Louvre. Lucius was here, scratched in Latin on Colosseum walls, even the earliest handprints in the famous caves. We've always been Tommies. See me, feel me, touch me, heal me, climbing platforms to sashay the wealth, not plunder now, but diamond contacts, accolades, and golden news, the flashy bling of being seen, such dread and hope and fear to hope that the work will live in some greater way in other minds, the confrontation with time and wanting to matter while inside it. I'm nobody. Who are you? Ms. D's morning cleanse or Uncle Walt's Jupiter tonic. I celebrate myself, which is to say I was heading into one last student reading at a college I was leaving to hear first poems about earth and sex and blood and stars, about the great forces and the dispossessed, parents, harm, and the boot of the state. Why, I thought, do any of us do any of this? And then verse came, such as it was. I was here. I lived in it. I died in it. This shit. Paradiso. Okay. This next poem is called Walk in the Park. It's a little bit longer. And it starts because I was thinking about Plato's Republic. And in book 10 of Plato's Republic, this really weird thing happens. He spends 9 chapters talking about the perfect city-state, which, by the way, he said the poets should be kicked out of because we tell lies. But in book 10, he suddenly tells you the myth of Er, E-R. Er is a soldier who's died, and he goes to the afterlife, and he is given the gift of coming back to the world of the living to tell us all what the afterlife is like. And as Plato is relaying this myth, he describes this thing called the wheel of necessity, which is a spindle that turns the orbit threads of the planets. And this turning spindle is the primary mover of the souls of the dead into their next bodies on earth, a poem about embodiment. And this wheel of necessity is attended by the goddess necessity in her threefold form, the Fates, who maybe some of us are more familiar with, who spin, measure, and cut each length of life. So I'm thinking about this while I'm walking in a park, and you're going to come with me. A walk in the park. To be born again, you need an incarnation specialist, a team from the Bureau of Needles to thread you through. Your next life turns on an axle of light, which Plato likens to a turning spindle. What was that? I mean, I knew what a spindle was from fairy tales, how it could draw blood from a testing finger, put a kingdom to sleep. But what did it actually do? How did a spindle look in real life? I didn't know. As with so many things, there was fact and there was a believed-in dream. Everyone had them back in the ancient day, spindles, when we had to weave our living shrouds by hand. A slender rounded rod with tapered ends, Google said. Plato's so heavy with thread when viewed from the side looked like a top. Though most diagrams assumed the Hawk Lord view. Moon threads, threads of the planets, Earth thread, your thread, everyone else's, nested one inside the other, a roulette machine. If a thread could be spun from liquid light was what I kept thinking. Imagining a sluice of electric souls between the earth wheel's rims. There, I was a piece of water. Necessity wheeled it around. Necessity, who was married to time, according to the Greeks. Mother of the fates, who would measure and cut your paradise shithole extra life. Well, we all have ways of thinking about why, metaphysically speaking, anyone's born. Though the answer's always life's, I am that I am. How it hurls and breaks on death's no there, which sounded kind of Buddhist. According to the teachings, we were all each other's dream. And soon able to vanish, out of the real without having to die, whoever's got the cash. To pay the brainier ones to perfect a heaven upload, to cut the flesh tether and merge with the cloud. Well, we all have ways of constructing paradise. To walk alone, deep in thought, in a city park was mine for several minutes, thinking about spindles. Before the vigilance of my gender doom kicked in. And there it was, the fact of my body. All the nerves in my scalp and the back of my neck alive. How it moved through space, how close it had strayed toward concealing trees, my female body. Jewish body, inside my white body, dreaming it was bodiless and free. To decide how and when and if to fill the body's hungers, how and when and if to walk in thought through the wilderness, before death comes with its fascist hat, its park murder misogyny hat, its year 10 in a nursing home stink hat. However spun my thread. Anyway. Excuse me. Anyway. It's peaceful here in the park at midday, if a little deserted. I've moved to the path that winds closer to the street. Thinking again, as I always do, about body and soul. How they infuse each other. How they hate each other. How most people pledge allegiance to one or the other. How painful it was to be such a split creature. Okay, sorry. It's dry here. I know. Okay. Whew. the next poem that I'm going to read is called The Birth and Death Corn. And what I want to tell you about is when I was born, I was very sick and I almost died. And when I was 6 days old, I had surgery to basically open me up from sternum to pelvis. And they removed a gangrenous part of my intestine. And I found out that in the 1960s, it was the common practice. You didn't give anesthetic to infants. They didn't think that the nerve endings were developed enough that it would matter. So at the most, I had a muscle relaxant. And when I lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I lived for 19 years, I had an amazing body worker named Jensen, who was really a shaman. And I have muscular skeletal issues that are a result of the surgery that I had. And I started to see Jensen for help with that. The other thing that you need to know about this poem is that this book, Now Do You Know Where You Are, was driven by great anxiety about the future. Most of the poems take place between 2016 and 2020, which to me, exactly, which to me, that's really when we entered the 21st century. You know, I feel like, for me, that's the period where, oh, this is what the 21st century is going to be about, is everything we're contending with. And I really became aware of it during that time period. The other thing that's happening before this poem, the occasion of this poem, is that I was getting ready to leave Santa Fe after 19 years and move to St. Louis, Missouri, where I now live, a city I knew very little about. I was freaked out. So I went to see Jensen and was telling him how afraid I was about everything, personal and collective. Well, he was like doing chiropractic. And while I was on the table, he started to tell me a story. And I started to realize that him telling the story while also manipulating my body was the same treatment. And he meant it that way. He was an intuitive. So this is the story that he told me, and it does relay the death of an infant, but it relays other things. The birth and death corn. Yesterday, I went to see Jensen, and while I was on the table, he told me the story of the birth and death corn, while he held the back of my head, probing my fucked up neck with his fingers. While I was coming off S's grief because J left her, D's grief because R left him, because D's father died and grief spun out reactive until he stood in tears at the bottom of my stairs. I had a laundry basket in one arm and D in the other. He was about to vanish into a cell in Christ in the desert, my Jewish Buddhist friend. And I was feeling so scared of walking into the future, when the present felt so dark and changed. A couple he had worked with, the mother in labor and the baby's heart stopping. The father so freaked out, he called Jensen from the room where they were jumping the baby, trying to get it to start, race, jump, and its battery going. But the doctors aren't happy, the father said to Jensen on the phone, because the brain was long gone. By law, they'd have to keep it hooked up for 4 days until damage could be itemized, asserted as fact. But everyone knew the soul baby was gone, and they were tending a meat balloon. The 4 days passed, and they let the body go. And then, as he prodded my neck and moved my skull around like a cap shoved wrong on top of a bottle, they sewed her umbilical into the ground, mixed with seed corn and the mother's placenta. And 9 months later, when the new corn was ready, they mashed it with water, making a pulp. Jensen was there. He told me about it. While I lay there so scared of walking into the future, how the family gave everyone who had gathered a cup. And he said, everyone drank her. They drank her, and to me, it was the opposite of grief's black milk. They told stories about the soul baby's lineage. how her spirit rode the stories like a current, how the drinking and the telling were the same. To be remembered, he said, and to nourish. And then he moved one hand from my neck to my sacrum, and with the other pushed a finger deep into my belly, into the crossroad hole in my network of scars. Once I had been a baby who had been born dying. And really, isn't that how each of us is born? Grow now and die in the future. He told me about the birth and death corn. Yeah. Okay. This last poem I'm going to read before I share this essay with you is called Maybe, which is, I finally came down to that's the answer. Are we going to survive? Maybe. Are we going to get through this time period? Maybe. There's a mention of a coleus, which is a very beautiful houseplant, and it comes in many different forms. But the one I'm thinking about has these kind of wild, like ace of spades shaped leaves that have this red in the middle and then green around it. It's very beautiful. So the coleus is my friend in this poem. Maybe was about all that I could muster. On the question of whether this world, which I prefer to think of in the past tense, will flourish. Though the first of the last fires hasn't even started yet. Has it? Maybe the past tense because it implies survival. Back then plus, but now. As if the future had already happened and you had made it out alive. Into midday living room peace. Into 2 o'clock April light, you and a trailing coleus, survivor too. Each leaf like a dab of dried blood on a scalloped pad of green. Sirens in the distance fading. Sirens in the distance above a wreck of ships, perched where literature starts with war and lost men, heroes enticed to death by birds with the heads of girls, myth opening its blood-drenched wings. Maybe it wasn't future death hounding me, but past ends. Not popular apocalypse, but cracked Atlantis. Golem Ozymandias, all the millions really dead in ruined capitals gone to ash and dream. Maybe it was my mother's scapegoat, trauma blood, keening. And suddenly, I could see them, every empire that ever rose and fell, spread out on discs across an infinite plane called absolute now, like records spinning, all playing the same song track by track. Ruin by better tech, ruin by hubris, ruin by appetite amok. And from this vantage, history looks like a choice. And I have to ask now, in the present tense, why choose the past as the future? Why? Don't do it. Don't choose the past as the future. Don't. Okay, friends, are you ready? Are you okay with this? I'm nervous. I'm okay. All right. Okay. So, memoir about becoming a poet. This particular essay, it bops around in time, but it opens in 1991. I'm 26. I'm in graduate school in New York City. I have also started traditional psychoanalysis, like on the couch, dude behind me going, say more about that. My work-study job was to show slides. Do you guys remember slide carousels? So my work-study job was to show slides for art history classes at the NYU grad school, which was housed in one of the robber baron mansions across from Central Park called Duke House. And so I used to sit up in this, like what had been the orchestra area overlooking the ballroom that had been turned into the lecture hall, and I would show slides. Gramercy Park makes an appearance, and if you've ever seen Gramercy Park, it's like a locked Eden. Only the people who live around Gramercy Park have a key to get into Gramercy Park, which just infuriated me when I moved to New York City, because I wanted to get in there, and I could not. This is an essay on images, but we will visit my childhood, which had its troubles. There are 12 sections, and I hope that each section moves like a slide in a carousel. So when I say the number, the slide has shifted. Okay, are we good? House of Feels. 1. I'm going to tell you about something that helped me once when I was a young woman, living for the first time in New York City, grieving and unmoored. What was I grieving? An unhappy childhood. Why was I unmoored? I hadn't realized how unhappy I was, which is a testament to how far I lived outside my body then. Sometimes I'd skip the subway and make the long journey by foot between my 4th floor walk-up in the decidedly still grungy East Village to Duke House at East 78th and 5th Avenue. Duke House was the site of New York University's Institute of Fine Arts, where graduate students studied art history and curation and restoration, and where for them I conducted the duties of my grad school work-study job as a slide projectionist in the converted orchestra balcony above the ballroom that was now a lecture hall. I mostly showed slides for classes in medieval European art, where religious images dominated. I began to notice in the details of paintings and altarpieces I projected on screen the dispassionate way angels heralded the most extraordinary events. The virgin birth of a god, for instance, or the resurrection of the dead. These angels seemed creatures of supernatural calm because they were creatures of light. That was all I wanted then, light, to blast the feeling out of me. 2. Whenever I made the trek to Duke House by foot, I'd pass by the Psychoanalytic Institute. That's how I've kept it in mind all these years, though Google now tells me it must have been called the Postgraduate Center for Mental Health. Some blocks after walking by Gramercy Park, yearning for a key into that locked Eden, I would see it. At some point, I pushed through the heavy glass doors and found out I could go to therapy for $20 a pop. The floor on which I found the office of Dr. Kane featured nothing but doors down a long white hallway. Each door was usually closed, and each door was painted a strong French blue. The white and the blue, that has stayed with me. And the windows along that hallway, each pane, 2 pieces of glass sandwiching a sheet of chicken wire. Dr. Kane welcomed me in through one of the blue doors and shut it behind me. He motioned to a chair and sat in the one opposite. He asked me why I'd come. I mumbled something about not being able to maintain intimate relationships with men, which sounded hollow the minute I said it. It wasn't hollow because it was untrue. It was hollow because my fitful relationships were a symptom, not the origin of my agon. Dr. Kane waited. Finally, I made my hand swim up and down like a seal, diving and coming up for air as it streamed from right to left. I can't take the this of things, I said. Then with great energy, I want everything to be like this. And with my hand, cut a steady horizontal line through the air. 3. Why was I so averse to feeling? For the first 10 years of my life especially, my encounters with feeling were, on the whole, negative. A bipolar father, a rager, a plate thrower, mad Zeus to my mother's controlling, stone-faced, denying Hera. So many feelings. My sisters and I were not allowed to have many. Feelings belonged first to my father, then to my mother. The magma of rage that boiled up in my father at the slightest provocation, a newspaper not folded, a skirt stake cut with the grain, was our daily natural disaster. He was tall, he was big, and his voice was volcanic. Have you ever experienced the human voice in anger blasting the air? More times than I can count, dinner ended in an explosion of yelling and dishes of meat smashed to the floor. For years, I associated these scenes with the phrase bloody murder. My daily vigils between my father's eruptions and the wall of my mother's face were sometimes punctuated by the door-kicking wrath of my middle sister. She was the only one of the sisters to claim rage for herself. My oldest sister and I shrank from it. Once, in a squabble about chores, she lunged at my father with a fork, upon which he socked her in the eye. Whenever the feelings of others welled, I fled upstairs to my room, site of imaginal escape. Reading, drawing, the construction of elaborate scenes of dolls and figurines and whatnots arranged on the tops of books. These served as platforms for dramas that finally disappointed because they would not come alive outside my head. I built these tableaux anyway, discovering in construction a method of self-forgetting. The solitary play disturbed my mother, who would inevitably come upstairs, throw open the bedroom door, and demand I go outside. Going outside meant being accosted by the gangly girl who lived 2 doors down. I will call her A. 4. Once, welling with feeling, A grabbed and held my arm down by the wrist, threatening to take my blood with a needle and tube she stole from her grandmother's nurse bag. She liked to lock me in a closet when it was time for me to go home. She liked to pinch my pudgy stomach under the table while her unreadable mother served us a snack. Pinch and hold on for as long and as hard as she could while I stayed silent. Taunts at the bus stop, petty ambushes, hair yanks, back shoves, side pinches, mimicking my protests and cries with a sneer. Occasionally, I stood frozen as A tortured someone else. Once, as she egged him on, her silent brother came at me with a 2x4. Once, as she egged him on, her silent brother threw a neighbor girl in the swimming pool after she told us she couldn't swim. 5. This went on for years until looming puberty turned A's attention. Why did I keep going over to her house? Because my mother told me to. I was an obedient child. And I wasn't the only kid suffering at A's hands. Why didn't we all protest? Because the 2x4 did not connect with my head. The neighbor girl didn't drown. Mainly what A waged was psychological terror meant to decimate the spirit. I think now her spirit must have been trapped in a secret. My automatic response to A's assaults was to withstand them as the rage at home had taught me. And whatever the neighborhood kids were enduring at their homes, the fact was it was the 1970s. Most of us were being raised by the stoic children of the silent generation. Like them, we were supposed to adhere as best we could to an inviolable domestic omerta. One did not tell. The few times I reached some limit of endurance and risked complaint, finally confessing to my mother what the feelings of others were doing to me, she would say, "What are you talking about?" She lobbed versions of this at anything that hurt or disturbed me so often that going to her for solace and solution was as risky as trudging outside to go play. The intensity of her rhetorical incredulity, I only realized when I was much older, was in direct proportion to how much she just could not hear about it. She was too busy bracing for my father's next violent rage or crater. What are you talking about? Thus began my literary training. 6. Despite the suggestion of the chicken-wired windows, I was not suicidal the day I finally pushed through the heavy doors of the Psychoanalytic Institute and waited in the hall for Dr. Kane. I was 25, which felt to me like a first version of being old. I had begun to realize I had survived something. Deep in the well under the navel's door huddled the exhausted, captive spirit. It had taken the shape of a child born into violence. What is it to grow up in a household where violence is done to the spirit? It's hard to talk about. No one beat me. I had a yard with a kidney bean-shaped swimming pool. At night, under my pink comforter, I willed myself to be still and stiff and silent as possible, as if by freezing myself, I could suspend my trek through time until the father raging downstairs subsided. My bed was a flower at the tip of a long ascending stalk, swaying a little as it climbed into space. Cold, dark, crystalline space with its spray of stars, where I was safe because I was alone. 7. But these lived facts are not the reason I want to tell you something. They are merely the reason I have something to tell. I don't remember the first time it bloomed up in my mind, if it came during my time with Dr. Kane or soon after. I received an image. It was an image of an enormous hall. It didn't have a ceiling as much as a feeling of extraordinary height, a sense of walls climbing into a stratosphere of clouds. The entire hall seemed made of crystal glass. It didn't have walls as much as lit matrices of exposed beams. Everything glinted. Everything was sharp, bladed, and reflective. For all its height, the hall was narrow. It extended so far beyond its entrance, you couldn't see the border of its back wall if it had one. Instead, a light in the shape of a diamond, nearly telescopic, it was so far away. It pulsed there, so bright, you knew you could not get close and endure it. And on either side of this crystal hall, extending towards that light, rows and rows of closed doors. Behind each door was a feeling. 8. I called this lit and bladed place the Hall of Emotions. I think now it was the destination of a journey in images begun 3 years earlier after I had graduated college. I had left Southern California and followed friends across the country to New England towns on either side of the Piscataqua River, Kittery Point, Maine, and Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where my life in images intensified. I told Dr. Kane about it, how all my life I had lived in the desert, had just spent 3 years in Claremont on a campus set in California's High Chaparral, and how before moving east, I had never seen a bird as striking as a cardinal. Scarlet streak in the brush, then a swoop up alighting on a treetop to make its piercing call. You could hear it before catching sight of it. Brilliant bird, so shy of being seen. I decided it was my heart escaped my body. I wrote about it obsessively, off and on, for the 3 years I lived in Portsmouth. And life became a living theater, wandering the wooded areas around town in winter, startling my red heart through snow-banked branches, as if one of the tableaux I had built in my childhood bedroom had finally come to life. I started a long sectioned poem about it that I never finished. But I knew the end, which I transcribed into my journal over and over, along with all the other stanzas detailing the drama of my fugitive heart. When the scalpel draws the line from throat to navel, when the flesh is peeled back and the ribs exposed, it will be the cardinal there, red and beating against a cage of bone. 9. When I moved to New York, the cardinal fell away, and I found myself assailed by the open chest only, burst open from the midline, shutters of flesh flung violently back. And in place of my heart, there would be a human eye or an eye of Horus, a bird of prey or a spiral galaxy, galleries of objects which rotated as if on a lazy Susan, globe, egg, hand, skull. It was as if, when my heart fled my chest, it left a space for a theater. In my inner eye, as I walked up the long avenues of Manhattan, the flesh curtains would slam back, and there would be the changing cast of objects, each in turn appearing on stage. But none of them were singing yet. I told Dr. Kane about it. Each session with him was like entering that theater, finding myself both audience and actor in scenes grueling and revealing. And then, one day, I can't remember if it came towards the end of my time with Dr. Kane or soon after, I found myself standing between high, bright, latticed walls, doors extending infinitely beyond me. It was as if the ice-limbed crowns of trees in the winter woods I used to wander in New England had touched down in my mind and grown unbelievably tall. So tall, I could not see where the tips of their branches ended, composing a crystal nave in a house of fields. 10. There's 12, so we're almost done. 10. That you could walk in and out of each room was the first miraculous thing. That each one had a door. I don't know why this felt so revelatory. I had been walking in and out of feelings for years in the theaters of art. And even if these theaters of art were made by other people to house their own feelings, I could safely visit. Within the borders of frames, screens, binding, pages, I could safely feel a little bit at a time. I was accustomed to feelings accosting and possessing. That's what I had witnessed all through my childhood, in my father, in my mother's steely brace of control, in my sister kicking a hole in the bathroom door while I cowered behind it. Unlike the feelings of parents, the feelings in art came to an end. You weren't forced to feel them forever. You could walk out of the theater. You could close the book. For a while, the Hall of Emotions came to me only as setting. The vanishing ceiling of the crystalline structure, its glass and edge, the facing rows of doors, the far-off diamond light. And at some point, the image arrived, and I walked through a door into a room and entered a miasmic cloud. In it, I could sense, could see a huddled figure, a brown smudge in a fog of feeling. If the figure was hazy, the feeling was not. This room was misery, and I knew it was the room I knew best. And I realized there were so many doors along that infinite hallway to so many rooms of feeling, and I had only ever dwelled in a few. And then, because there was a door, I finally understood. I could walk out of misery's room. 11. It's astonishing to me that I never once realized that this crystal hall of emotions had its chicken-wired analog in the hallway at the Psychoanalytic Institute. Not until today, writing this draft 30 years later. Or that hall, with its infinite length of rooms, each one housing a particular feeling, had arrived just as I was working on the art of housing moods in stanzas. Or that, in that first meeting with Dr. Kane, when I cut that steady horizontal through the air, I was drawing a picture of flatline. Flatline, the preferred state, so I had declared. But I had not meant dying. I had meant not feeling. Feeling meant anxiety. And from my earliest experiences of being alive, I had been trapped in it. I was a fat, clumsy, brainy, dreamy child navigating a dread inextricably bound to the society in which I was supposed to feel at home. My neighbors, my schoolmates, my parents. Peace seemed an abstraction, wholly unlived. That finding it seemed to involve excruciating light rather than the engulfing darkness interests me now. Was this what they call saving grace? It felt like an instinct. Illumination would save me, not the body-killing plunge. I could see it in the faces of angels at Duke House, in the slides I projected 3 times a week. 12. Many years after these events, when I was in my late 30s, the alcohol and opiates my middle sister took to endure a complicated, trying life failed her, and she died. 4 years after my parents died, father and then mother, 6 months apart. Soon after I received news of my sister's death, I had one session with a Jungian analyst, S, the wife of a friend, who offered. In that session, she asked if I had an image for how I was feeling. I told her I kept seeing the same scene, my surviving sister and myself, exhausted, barely clinging to a makeshift raft in endless open sea. She told me to let the image change. This was strangely hard. I've never been sure why. Maybe letting go of the image of the raft felt the same as drowning. But then, behind my closed eyes, the scene began to change to the backyard of my childhood home, my inner eye trained on our bean-shaped pool, especially the concrete border that traced round it, and the brick walls separating our backyard from the backyards of our neighbors. S noted how the endless open sea had transformed into a contained swimming pool, something familiar and familial, firmly lodged in experience. She said, even more than from the shock of your sister dying so soon after your parents, your suffering stems from not having a shape for what has happened to you. I'd said I was going to tell you about something that helped me once when I was young, grieving and unmoored. Once. Didn't I mean this time of shipwreck too? Didn't I mean all the times I was helped when I was lost, when I didn't understand the shape of my life? Every person is born with a mind for images, vessels ready to respond to a call, to ferry you towards or away, wherever survival is, to conjure against annihilation. This is an essay on figuration. Thank you. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. I hope it wasn't onerous.
It was awesome. Thank you. Come buy some books. Come talk with Dana. Thanks, everybody, for being here. We'll see you at Brenda Lozano's reading later in the month. Take care.